So, Vermont history students, this is the video for section Unit 11, and it's Monday morning of the last week of classes. If you can call them classes, the last week of the course. And the way it's going to play out is, first of all, great discussion answers for those of you who gave them to me last Friday. Great town meeting this morning. I will not go at length about it because I gave my comments, which you can go onto the discussion board and read, for the three of you who responded to the town meeting questions. As we move forward towards the end of the semester, what's going to happen is on Wednesday there's going to be another discussion question that wraps up Unit 11, and then I figure instead of having a discussion question on Friday, as we traditionally would for each unit, we'll skip it for Unit 12, the last unit, and we'll just have a good town meeting. The way that town meeting works is that, as always with the last town meeting, usually I ask students in class what are some contemporary issues you want to argue about. But rather than ask you and wait for responses to come back, I just put them up this morning. There's a chicken pie battle, and that's the real test if you're a real Vermonter or not. And then also there is questions about topics I thought were good topics. Were you willing to pay higher taxes to clean up the environment? How do you feel about marijuana legalization? I thought would probably be amusing. And the other one's about wind farms. And so what I did was I put up the links and I copied and pasted them onto this, you'll see in the course materials folder for part 6 of the course. And hopefully you can copy and paste those into your browser for the 3 articles about contemporary issues, 2015 topics that I put up. But if you have any problems, get in touch. Maybe I'll just email you the links or something like that so life is easy for you, because I want life to be easy for you. And then by Friday, hopefully, we'll have a good town meeting and you'll read all the responses and we'll have some good back and forth. And then hopefully by then, of course, I'll have 3 assessment papers assessing the unity of Vermont in different eras, and then you'll have finished up the course. And if you, I have one person's already given me 3. You're done. Another person's 2 other people have given me 2, and I'm looking forward to everyone else giving me the articles and finishing up the papers, finishing up. Also, I'm going to go back over during the course of the semester the discussion questions in the town meetings, because obviously participation in the course is a really huge part of your final grade, and so even though your fellow students won't benefit from your comments and thoughts, obviously you'll benefit from actually knowing the material, showing me you know the material, and answering discussion questions in the past. So I really want to reward people who have been the fundamentally, contributors to the course, and because you made it better for everyone else. And so I will reward you if you are really faithful about always commenting and giving me your thoughts and all of that. And that's that. Now, okay, so there's 2 sections to this unit of the course. The first section really follows on the heels of the end of the last Unit 10, which culminated with Act 250. Act 250 is a landmark environmental bill. It has national implications. It was way ahead of its time. It still is. And what its goal is to measure all development on the basis of 10 criteria to make sure that it does not have an onerous and deleterious impact on the human and physical landscape. Obviously, with the amount of regulation that is bound up in it, there are detractors to it, people who don't like it, and people who like the concept but don't like it, specific parts of it. I mean, it's been something we've always kicked around and revised over the last 45 years since it was adopted. Act 250 really speaks to the fundamental problem that Vermonters have had to engage with ever since the highways were built and going up past 1970 into the 80s and the 90s, which is that now that the highways are built and Vermont's within a driving distance of millions and millions, tens of millions of people, one day's driving distance, and it's as much metaphorical as it is practical, the interstate era. If Vermont doesn't have a huge amount of regulation, then it's going to become way overdeveloped, and Vermont will become like New Jersey. It's not that New Jersey is a bad place. I lived in New Jersey. I liked living in New Jersey a great deal. But I don't want to live in New Jersey now. I want to live in Vermont. And so we don't want Vermont to get overdeveloped, but that requires, to keep Vermont from getting overdeveloped, requires an enormous amount of regulation and limitations on what people can do with their land and their resources and their lives. And so there's a cost that a lot of people are resentful of, and the particular implication is that there's a huge amount of regulation. Is Vermont can become a mecca for the rich? Is it can be a place in which normal people can afford to live anymore? So it's either going to be a place that's destroyed where normal people can't live, or it's going to be a place that's preserved where normal people can't live. And that's sort of the dilemma that people face now. I have faced in the 70s and in the 80s. In the 1970s, Vermont's population growth exceeded the national population growth rate for the first time since the decade between 1800 and 1810. The 1970s, and it wasn't just hippies on communes, it was people moving up for IBM and other businesses. Vermont's population grew faster than the national average, and something needed to be done. But what to do was the question that people faced. People faced the question, who owns Vermont? Who really does own Vermont? And I put up some zoning images that will give you an idea about how incredibly zoned Vermont needs to be in order to preserve the physical landscape. I figured that the centerpiece of the unit should be actually a piece of fiction written by the great Wallace Stegner, who had a summer house on Lake Caspian in Greensboro, and you can read the chapter. I put it up. It's called Crossing. It's from the book Crossing to Safety. But to make a long story short, what happens is, wealthy Boston family, academic family, has summer home on lake. Young graduate student, apparently poor, is smitten with one of the young daughters, comes to visit them there. They complain because a farmer who owned the land across the lake was going to sell the land there, his land, for development, and people were planning on putting in, the developers were planning on putting in a campground with a swimming, with a movie theater and a restaurant and a skating rink and all these things. And the family who owns the summer home are really concerned because it's going to ruin their view and it's going to be loud and noisy and obnoxious. And it turns out miraculously that the young suitor of the woman who just is visiting is filthy rich. And he goes over to the farmer and buys the land for twice as much so it can remain undeveloped, and therefore the people's view won't be ruined. And it's like going all the way back to when tourism got big in the 1890s. It is that weird neurotic inversion of the original uphill-downhill sort of divide, which is now downhillers don't want development because they want Vermont to be scenic and beautiful because it's its best asset. But now what are uphillers going to do for jobs? I mean, if they had actually put in the movie theater and the skating park and all the other things, that would have been a lot of local jobs. Can uphillers afford to live in a state that is so regulated that there's so little development that, I mean, that's the big problem. So read the chapter and have a good think about that. And that is what happened, is in the 70s and 80s and 90s, all the way through that era, it seemed as if, the downhill vision had matured. At first, when tourism kicked in the 1890s, 1900s, then downhillers had to wrap their brains around the concept of diminishing returns. You can't just use tourism in order to promote growth without threatening the very thing you're selling. And gradually, downhillers came to embrace Vermont's backwardness, its rural character, not just as a commodity, but as a genuinely wonderful thing that defines what's great about the state and why you'd want to live there. And so you get through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and downhillers are going along and they think everything's great and that Vermont is beautiful and wonderful and that they totally have the perfect way of preserving the uphill life that they like so much. Much typified by the Man with the Plan movie. And I put up a wonderful sort of newspaper article about when Fred Tuttle, an old dairy farmer from Thetford, who ran from Tunbridge, who ran for the United States Senate against a out-of-state businessman, and downhillers all thought that was hilarious. And then the second unit of the course is BANG, the Take Back Vermont movement. Now, some of you may have heard of it before. You might have even seen the signs that still exist for Take Back Vermont. Some of you may not know much about it. It was a fascinating period in Vermont history. It began about 2000. And it really began with the passage of the Supreme Court ruling that said Vermont needed to give equal rights to homosexual couples as to heterosexual couples. And this led to the passage of the civil unions law. It wasn't marriage back then, it was civil unions, and Downhillers thought that was great and fair and wonderful. And I remember I was living in Essex and teaching at UVM, and people all thought, oh, it's great. Everyone agrees that it's a wonderful thing that gay couples should have the same legal rights, of course, you know, visitation in hospitals and raising children and taxes and, you know, mutually owning businesses, all those things that heterosexual couples have. And I was working for the Vermont Historical Society as a traveling lecturer, and I would drive out of this Burlington bubble and see these Take Back Vermont signs, come back to Burlington, tell people about them, people would be like, huh? Don't know what you're talking about. But it was big, and it began really in Washington, Vermont, with this guy, Dick Lambert, who began to print up these signs. And the extent to which it was actually about civil unions is a debate people have had ever since. To a great extent, I think it wasn't about civil unions, but that might have touched everything off. It was about the massive degree which Downhillers were now running the state. They shoved civil unions down their throats, they thought, and they have, with all the regulations and all of the organicness and all of the skiing resorts and all of the things that make it so uphillers can't afford to live in Vermont anymore. It's like this state's not a democratic thing anymore. It's not like everyone gets to have their voices heard. And the Take Back Vermont movement was a response to that. And I could go on, but these are supposed to be short videos. I'll tell you this, though, is that the Take Back Vermont movement, in a lot of ways, was kind of a fail, because Downhillers didn't understand what was going on. And they were mostly like, what? What's wrong with civil unions? What are you, anti-gay? When it was about a lot of other things besides that. Uphillers, though, took the wrong approach, which is instead of saying to Downhillers, talking across the divide, share Vermont, you know, include us in the decision-making, they only talk to each other. We'll have to take back Vermont. To when? Downhillers have been in the state since the 1770s. Take it back to what? And instead of talking to Downhillers and saying, there's something wrong here, you're not listening to us, they only talk to each other. Because uphillers don't see the big picture. And Downhillers didn't understand uphillers, and so it went like this. But I want you to really think about the discussion question and give me smart responses to the question is, the period between 2000, 2002, 2003 was really interesting. Lots of arguing about who a Vermonter is and what a Vermonter is. But on the whole, was it a positive thing? Was it progress towards balancing freedom and unity that the Take Back Vermont movement took place? Or is it just a sign that really Vermont is the story of two different goals and two groups of people who have different visions of what the state was supposed to be? So the question is up there. Think about it, and I'm looking forward to your answers by Wednesday. Town meeting on Friday. No discussion question. Get me your papers. We should be good. Write me if you have any questions.